Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we're continuing our conversation with Dr. Stephen Lewis of Doctors Nutrition of Texas. And welcome to the program, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Hey, so today we are talking about how lab work is so important to working with the thyroid. And of course, lab work is helpful in all kinds of medical things as well. But today we're focusing on how it will affect and impact the thyroid. So can you tell us a little bit about the background of why lab work and then how you provide that to your clients and patients?
Well, that's a real good point. I try to drive this home, and let me say this, that, we had talked before about the chemicals that are in our environment. About a week ago, I got into some chemicals. I was spraying some water repellent on my windshield, and the pump broke, and it got all over my hand and dripped down my arm, and therefore I ended up with bronchitis. But thank goodness Janet knows enough about detoxification to get this out of my system, so it didn't cause as many problems as normal. And that's why we should have lab work. There's so many people that get on the internet and consult with Dr. Google, and they decide, well, it's my thyroid. And I've seen some people that it wasn't their thyroid, or people that come in and say it's my exhausted adrenals, and I would test, and it wouldn't be that either. There's a huge, very important axis between the thyroid and adrenals. If you have one, you eventually have the other. So lab work takes out the guesswork. You just have to, bring the parameters down to where you can actually see what's going on and not just suppose, off the internet. So we do a pretty thorough lab regarding thyroid, and it's certainly not all inclusive because it's not necessary all the time, but a lot of doctors start with TSH, and that's all they do, and that's very, very, in my opinion, incorrect and incomplete. So I do 5 parts unless it looks kind of strange, and then we do more.
So when you say lab work, you work with people from many parts of the country. So it's not necessarily them coming in to see you and doing lab work in your facility. How does that work when someone is looking for nutritional supplements and then you're wanting them to go get some lab work done?
Well, we have a way to go through and get lab work done in almost all of the states, and it's very necessary and very appropriate, because I have people here that have relatives in Ohio, or, people out of Hollywood, and people in Florida, Washington, all over the country. And people hear my podcast, and, they'll call me from Canada or London. We actually have people that utilize our services in Europe. And, for the countries that we can ship into, we do. We ship to London quite a bit, and we ship to Afghanistan and Kuwait and several other places. So it's just a matter of, like I talked about before, it's not what you know. It's what you have faith in and what you put your effort and desires toward. And if you think about what you want, you end up creating that versus if you think about what you don't want. So it's your faith that carries this. But lab work, in my opinion, gives me enough understanding so that I can have more faith.
That brings up an interesting point. It made me think of the concept of self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that you can zero in on one aspect of, let's say, the lab work in this example and say, see, I knew what fill in the blank, right? Because they wanted to see something or thought they were going to see something, but then you're so myopic on that one aspect of the lab work that you didn't factor in the other aspects, or like you were saying, the elements of, one of the tests that you didn't go deep enough on.
That's a very good point, and you're actually, I think, a very wise man from just talking to you a few times, because earlier when I was talking about say zinc or selenium, you'd say, well, you wouldn't want somebody to say, oh, I must have a selenium deficiency and just take selenium. And you're absolutely right. There's so many different things that you need to factor in order to get a wide range of adaptability, for your body. And, we in America, I think, have pretty much forgotten that our body's run by God, a higher power, a wisdom inside, that if it has the right nutrients and get out the toxins that we've talked about, then your body begins to work like it's supposed to and like it's trained to do anyway. It has that wisdom. So it just needs no interference from the toxins and no interference from our mental hang-ups and spiritual problems. And it needs the nutrients so that it can, cure itself. The only thing that cures any disease is your own body.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I believe that and agree with that. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. God's created everyone. But I think some people take it to the extreme and say, and that's why I'm not going to, and they continue on with, not get my kids, immunizations. I'm not going to take any medicine. I'm not even going to take Tylenol or aspirin. And then they take that to the extreme, which we know that that's just an extreme view. But where would you guide someone in saying, these lab work results, here's what you need to go to your local, and you would guide them to their local lab, and you need to get this type of a lab work done and have the results sent in. What are you having them, what are you watching for first when the lab report comes in?
Well, we get a preliminary in before it's final, and if there's any alerts, we contact the patient. Sometimes their hemoglobin and hematocrit's real low, their ferritin is flagged extremely low, and I'll call them up and say, go to your hospital immediately and, talk to them about the possibility of a transfusion. There's several people that's been saved that way, and I don't take the credit for that. We have to watch this even before it finals, but as far as the thyroid goes, we normally do 5 parts. That's TSH, or thyroid-stimulating hormone. Then we do thyroxine, or T4. And then we do T3 uptake. Then we do free thyroxine index. And then we do a free T3. And again, if the ratios of these things look real funny, then sometimes we will add on a TPO, or thyroid peroxidase, to see if they have the autoimmune disease Hashimoto's.
And like you were saying earlier, sometimes people only get just a basic lab work done where there's only one of those. But when you have such a deep 5-level or more, then you're able to see the full picture that you might have caught something that just the basic lab report might not have picked up on.
Well, that's what I'd like to really discuss, because the ranges are so skewed because the ranges are taken from a sick population, like on thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. The normal conventional lab range is about a 0.45 to a 4.5, and that's a huge, huge range. Well, most of the doctors now agree, and even some of the big thyroid entities, that's all they study, say, it really should be on the low end, like a 2 or 1.5 and below. The reason for that is if the pituitary in the brain is putting out the TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, and the thyroid's not using it, then it goes high. And so that's why there's so many people that have hypothyroid, and they don't really realize it because they're still in range. So there's a lot of things that you have to look at. So when the high TSH, or when it goes high, that's the body's way of saying, hey, we need more thyroid hormone. And that's just, it's not a very, it's a sensitive test, but it's certainly not all inclusive. There's too many other things that you have to factor in. So between a 4.5 and a down on the low side to a 0.45, that's just not right. But when it goes extremely low, it can be hyper hyperthyroidism or secondary hypothyroidism, which means there's a pituitary problem. It's not functioning correctly. And it can mean things like a heavy metal body burden, which is lead, aluminum, cadmium, and other toxic metals, which all of us have that. And that's why it's extremely important to supplement and make sure that the body has what it needs to begin to open up the detoxification pathways. So TSH is really good. It's just not enough. And, there's things that interfere with that, the radioisotopes, when you do testing with that. And there's different drugs that always rob your body of nutrients. And there's even books written on that. But when it goes high, it can be just something as simple as Hashimoto's, and that's why we test the TPO, and it can be subacute, and it can be a liver function. Most people don't realize that most of their thyroid hormones are converted in the liver, and like T4, 20% of that is converted to T3 in the GI tract, and that's where it's very important to go into the GI tract and have the proper probiotics and the proper digestive enzymes. So there's just so many different factors. It's just, you just have to look and figure it out and have somebody that has a large enough knowledge base to help you figure it out. Go between your education and your intuition, and you usually come to a very good conclusion that can help you.
So it sounds kind of like a puzzle in the sense of that you can't just hear one thing or see one thing on the report, go to Dr. Google and go, yep, this is my diagnosis, or even have just a basic report run, because one thing could be showing and indicating something, but yet you could have two or three other things going on, like you were saying in the GI tract, or, it's producing this hormone, which is fine, but it's kind of like having a sponge. When you pour water in there, there's a certain point where the sponge just isn't going to take in more water. You got to squeeze it out and make the sponge receptive again. And all of a sudden now that's, no fault of the water. It's just that the sponge needs to be cleaned out.
I love your analogies. That's very good. So we normally would check free thyroxine index. And, I want to go over these briefly just so the person can get an idea and say, oh, that's why these other books were confusing, and I need someone to help me figure this out. But they need a basic knowledge. So free thyroxine index, the ranges are, again, pretty vast. Conventional range is usually about a 1.4 to a 3.8. But optimal range can be much, much different than that. It can be, from the low side to even higher than the conventional range. Low, if it goes low and it's factored in, it's usually just hypothyroidism, and then you have the burden of finding out why is your thyroid not functioning correctly. When it goes high, it's usually as simple as hyperthyroidism, or your thyroid's working, too hard. So that one is, I always do it because that's just part of the equation. It's not I don't think it's the most important, but certainly needs to be looked at. Then free T4, because you've got free and you've got reverse, and reverse is the one that you don't really, it's an inactive hormone. But free T4 is the major hormone that's secreted by the thyroid gland. That's the one that's very, very important that you have a proper amount of iodine. The T4 production, and when it secretes from the thyroid, is actually stimulated by the TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. Something as simple as a deficiency in zinc, copper, and vitamins A, B2, B3, B6, and C, that alone could cause a decrease in the production of the T4. So, you could be a nutritional deficiency, or you could have something that's interfering with that and won't allow that to work. The optimal ranges should be high. The standard range is about a 0.8 to a 1.8. Well, that needs to be on the high side. Why should it be on the high side when TSH should be on the low side? Well, because you want a large amount of T4 so your body has the ability or has the raw material to convert. whether it's in the liver or in your GI tract. So you want the T4 to be on the high side, and you have to have enough of those zinc and copper and some of the B vitamins. And the C is very important because that helps your body actually get rid of a lot of the heavy metals. And, we don't hear much about vitamin C because that's old news, and they're always promoting the newest, the latest, and the greatest. But, I don't think people should forget about vitamin C. So, when it goes low, which is the bad thing on free T4, it's primary hypothyroidism, and it can be secondary hypothyroidism, which means you've got a problem with your anterior pituitary. That's part of the brain. And it can be as simple as just an iodine deficiency. So when it goes high, it can mean that your thyroid's working too hot, although we don't really see that very much. Sometimes you can get too much just because your body's not really converting, and, we can always figure that out and fix it. Like there's so many, the things that would decrease the T4 to T3 conversion can be chronic illness, when you smoke cigarettes, when you got the TPO antibodies or Hashimoto's, different drugs that you're taking, and even as simple as estrogens and birth control pills. Too much radiation when you fast, heavy metal toxicity, high stress. Now, who's not stressed these days? I'm one of the few that's not, because I think when we're stressed, we're not in alignment with God's Word. But, that's my opinion on that. So I don't really get that stressed out. I just show up and smile. So, and physical traumas, when people are in accidents, that can interfere with conversion of T4 to T3. So again, there's so many different things you have to factor into it.
When you have people call in to you and ask questions or email or go to your website, right, many times they are starting to engage with you through your website because they need some nutritional supplements. So at what point are you advising or encouraging them to get some lab work done? Because sometimes people would think, I just want to buy a bottle of whatever, I'm looking for. So I know that you're not telling everyone before you can buy from me, you have to do this. But at what point, when during their questioning process or advice seeking, are you going to advise, we need to get some lab work to set a baseline?
Well, I don't push people. And some people just say, well, I want you to put me on something that would possibly help me with ADD, ADHD, stress, anxiety, depression. And I'm happy to do that. But that's like, you're asking at what point. And it's like, well, if you buy a brand new car, at what point do you put gas in it so you can go? Mm-hmm. So I think it takes a lot of the guesswork out, takes a lot of the time out, and it, for the most part, makes it easier and more quick to fix the problem.
Well, you mentioned car, and I'm not a car guy, but I know enough that when something's not seeming right, the newer cars these days, you take into the dealership and they run diagnostics on the computer, and we had a recall on we've got a 2014 minivan, and took it in, and they said, yep, we downloaded 3 updates to the operating system, and I was going, you mean like a computer? And in the old days, you just change the carburetor or the filter. Well, you have to do that so that you know what's going on. And they said, yeah, we found that this relay needed an update and this fuse or whatever the case is. Well, with a quick diagnostic run, you can see what is going on in the engine that you need to see addressed. Well, I would suspect that you don't have to do that. You can let that go for years and years until something big happens, and then you've got a big bill and a big inconvenience. You probably don't have to run labs every single time you buy some supplements, but depending on what you're dealing with physically, it could be a good idea just to set that baseline and give you some direction of what kind of a supplementation protocol, I would suspect.
That's really true. We'll start out running lab, a little bit more often, but as a person finds their so-called sweet spot and they find out what kind of nutrition it takes to make them healthy and to achieve their goals, not my goals, but their goals, then we put lab off, later and later and later. And some people never get lab, and they're just thrilled with our services anyway, and I'm happy to do that too. I don't run my lab but every year or so, or, if I feel bad for 2 or 3 weeks in a row, I'll run it. But I pretty much know what to do and what to take, and don't need all that information. But the next thing that I think is really, really important besides free T4 is T3 uptake. And T3 uptake, and I tell people, well, it's generally, that should be on the high side, from mid-range to the high side. And the reason is, and this is a generalization, but the more estrogen dominant you are, meaning the plastics, pesticides, phthalates, fire retardants, and heavy metals that mimic estrogen, the more toxic load you have in your body interfering with all functions, not just thyroid, the lower the T3 uptake is going to go. And that's true of women that are on hormone replacement therapy, or young women that are on birth control pills. Their T3 uptake goes low. So, usually it depends on the lab, because they all have a little bit different parameters. Usually they'll say it should be from about a 22 to a 35. And optimal is, again, somewhere around mid-range to higher, and even higher than the 35. When that goes low, it can be just the primary hypothyroidism, and that's what we see most of the time. The thyroid's not working as good as it should, and it can be something as simple as selenium and iodine deficiency. So if it goes really, really high, it can be hyperthyroidism, but most of the time when it goes super high, like off the charts, that's because you're on a thyroid hormone replacement. And again, that's not a dangerous thing. They've worked with their doctor to get that. But when it goes low, which is the thing that you don't want, there can be severe liver disease. And again, that's why the liver is so important in converting all these hormones. It can be different prescribed drugs, or it can be pregnancy. If you're pregnant, all bets are off. The next thing that we think is very, very important is free T3. Free T3, even if your thyroid stimulating hormone is a little bit higher than I would like, free T3 trumps almost everything else. The ranges on that should be, most labs will say 2.3 to 4.0. I like it to be about a 3.0 to 3.5, and it can go a little bit higher than that. So free T3, that's the T3 that is usable. The body takes it, runs with it. And then you've heard of reverse T3. Now, reverse T3 is the inactive hormone. Now, folks, if you have an inactive hormone that's too high, like reverse T3, that's when you're really stressed out. You have high cortisol, and that goes back to the adrenal thyroid axis. So, if you have an adrenal issue, you have a thyroid issue, but sometimes it takes a little time to catch up. So when free T3 goes low, again, you got the hypothyroidism, but when I say hypothyroidism, you have to figure out what's causing that, and there's so many different possibilities. You could have the T4 conversion problems that I just talked about. You could have an anterior pituitary problem in your brain. We're seeing it more and more because we're a toxic world. And hopefully it's something simple like a selenium deficiency, and that's actually pretty common. When it goes high, and that's usually not a real problem, it's hyperthyroidism or maybe a thyroid deficiency. And again, when it goes low, it can be pregnancy or liver disease. It's just kind of a repeat of what you've already heard. Or protein malnutrition. And a lot of people think, well, I eat protein. Well, just because you consume protein doesn't mean that you digest it. And that's why good digestive enzymes and probiotics are very, very important. And it can be renal disease or liver disease. So you definitely want to have somebody that understands the big picture and kind of filters through all of that.
So any other kind of hot spots regarding the lab work that people should be aware of? We know the importance of it now, but what are some of the things that you will be looking for that you've not already mentioned with the uptakes in the T3s and the T4s?
Well, the only thing I'd really like to say that I haven't said, if the TSH goes high, or it goes high, goes low, goes high, goes low, and has a very inconsistent pattern, that's when I would run the thyroid peroxidase. And I've read dozens and dozens of books and hundreds of real research articles, and they say conflicting things. And I've heard people say that somewhere around 80% of all hypothyroidism is Hashimoto's, and I've read where some experts say, well, it's 90 to 99% of all hypothyroidism is Hashimoto's, and that may very well be true in their practice. I've not seen those numbers be high, and that's why I don't run the thyroid peroxidase right off the bat. But if you see those bad patterns, I can add it on. The conventional range is, 0 to 9. And again, that changes with the labs. And you want it to be on the low side. If it goes low, I wouldn't worry about it at all. It's not a problem because your body's not putting out the antibodies and it's not fighting your own thyroid. But if it goes high, you have to suspect early stage or late stage Hashimoto's. And I cannot tell you how many women especially, I'll tell them what is on their lab, and they start crying, and I say, I'm so sorry, did I offend you in some way? And they say, no, you're the first doctor that listened to me in 10 years, and we've been chasing this with drugs, and I've still felt terrible, like I don't have my life, and can you imagine the social interactions with my family that I've missed because I felt bad? And, we have the best medical profession in the world. I very, very much admire them. They're hardworking. They're dedicated. They're incredible people. And they've saved my life at least once or twice, literally. But what's missing is either we don't have the nutrition to function correctly or we have too many of the plastics and fire retardants. And, you can always learn more about that by going on my website and listening to some of the podcasts that Janet and I put out so that people can have an education and have that knowledge to have a better understanding, to create more faith, to step off into doing what's necessary to do. And there's a scripture in Proverbs, I think it's Proverbs 22:3, that says, a wise man foresees danger and takes precautions, but a simpleton or a fool ignores that and then suffers the consequences. And, that sounds a little harsh, but to me that's motivation for me to take steps toward trying to circumvent some of the bad things that would happen if I waited until it was too late.
And Scripture also teaches that faith without works is dead. And in this case, that means you got to have the faith that this can help you, and then the works is taking some action. It doesn't mean you now know about it, or aware of it. It means you've got to then get that lab work or get connected with someone that can help you interpret it, or take action on, because it's work to fix better meals and eat better and push the plate away and not order the smothered fries at whatever restaurant you go to. So I think that's where some of those principles come in, where you can have that head knowledge, but you got to get the heart knowledge, and then you got to bring it all together and put one foot in front of the other and take some action, because that's when things start coming to you, because you're getting out there and getting it done, and you're not going to get it done just sitting around going, think positive, think positive. Now, thinking positive is wonderful. We got to have a great mindset, and that's great, but it doesn't just conjure things up and bring them out of thin air. It happens because you're out there, hustling.
That's really wise the way you say that. And I tell people, if you want something, you have to throw seeds into the ground, so to speak. And if you want a big crop, you have to throw a lot of seeds. And, I like doing the getting close to the earth thing. And when I planted wildflowers, I planted 12 to 14 acres of the wildflowers. I didn't put out one little package. I put out, Janet tells people how much I spend on wildflowers, and I say it doesn't matter. It's beautiful, but I had to put out dozens and dozens and dozens of pounds of wildflower seeds, and I had the most beautiful pasture in East Texas. So, that's the same thing with the body. If you will throw proper nutrition in and give it the time to germinate and to grow and mature, and then you get the result. And that's one of the things with this action, you have to have a little bit of patience too.
Yeah, because you didn't get into the condition you're in overnight, and you can't get out of the condition you're in overnight. It takes the patience, the faith, the work, and guess what? If you put in the hard work consistently enough, at some point, that hard work becomes just work. And then that work becomes manageable and not some burden, because it is, you've gotten over that hump of the, the hard work to get back into balance and equilibrium. So it's not hard and cumbersome forever, but you do have to get that going. It's like pushing that boulder up the hill. It's pretty heavy, and gravity's working against you, but at some point the ground levels off, and now you're just kind of tap, tap, tap.
Right. You're absolutely right. So, I would just encourage people to take the action step, and, we'll guide you if that's what they, want me to do. And, I had a lady come in the other day, and I was with a person giving a lab, and the lady and her husband came in the room, and the lady hugged my neck. I mean, she squeezed me and says, "Oh my God, I can't believe how good I feel." And her husband was like, "Yes, oh man, it's been such a blessing." I said, "Really? It's only been 3 weeks," but it was their faith that caused that to happen in such a big manner and so quickly. And so I love things like that. It's encouraging me to continue to do what I do and make the world a better place to live, just because these people, if they put in a little bit of work toward being healthy, then how much disease care do they avoid later on? And,
that story reminds me of something that we'll close with here, which I'm sure you heard this, or a variation of this too, where the grandpa and the grandson are walking along the beach, and he's throwing in these, like starfish or silver dollars, and he's throwing them back in the ocean, and there's just thousands and thousands, and he goes, "Hey, this is a living creature. Boom, let's get this back to the ocean where they can breathe and live." And he goes, "But Grandpa, you can't save all of these. Why even bother?" He goes, "Well, it matters to this one right here. Throw it in. This one right here, throw it in." So you can make a difference one at a time, a step at a time. You don't have to bite off the whole chunk and try to get it done all at once, because no one can shoulder that burden.
You're right, and that's all we can do is fix ourselves and heal ourselves, mentally, physically, spiritually. And once we heal ourselves, then the world around us begins to change for the better. And, I'm just very pleased that I can be part of that.
Super. Well, let's leave or close this with what's the best way for people to reach you at your website, and how can they learn more?
Well, it's doctorsnutrition.org. That's drsnutrition.org. Or you can call us at 903-663-1008. We're very available. Janet has me do all this technological stuff, and, I've started a closed Facebook group, so if somebody wants to get on there and ask me questions, I'm going to be available to answer their nutritional questions and supplemental questions. So, just contact us, and we'll tell you how to get started. And I'm embarrassed because Janet knows all this. I just stick my head in the research, and she sticks her head in the technology.
What a team. That's awesome. So that's great. It's great to get to know you here on this interview, talking about labs and how important they are. So thank you so much for your time, Dr. Lewis.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.